מחמוך, מציל אני מחזק ממנו, ואני ואביון מגוזלו, מיד מלך ומי ישווה לך, ומי יערוך לך, האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון קונה שמיים וארץ, נהללך ונשבחך ונפארך, ונברך את שם קודשך כאמור לדוד. ברכי נפשי את אדוני בכל קרבי את שם קודשו האוהל בתעצומות עוזך הגדול בכבוד שמך הגיבור לנצח והנורא בנורותיך המלך היושב הכיסא רם ונישא. We're in the middle of page 336 with the word Shochen Ad, the formal beginning of Shacharit, in the middle of page 336. Shochen Ad Maharom V'Kadosh Shemo Atu Aranu Tarim Adonai Naisharim Navati Lava V'fi Sharim Tithalal Uvdivrei Tzadikim Titbarach Uvilshon Hasidim Titromam Uvekerev Kedoshim Titkadash Umakalot Rivavot Amcha Beit Yisrael Einayit Bershimcha Makinim B'chol Davador Sheken Chovat Kol Yitzrim L'fanecha Adonai Eloheinu V'Elohei Avoteinu Lehodod, Lehalel, Leshabeach, Lefaer Leromem, Lehader, Levarech, Lalei, Ulekales Al Kol Divrei Shirot V'Tishbachot David ben Yishai Avdecha Meshichecha. We rise for Yishtabach, page 338 in the middle of the page. Yishtabach. Yishtabach Shimcha Lad Malkeinu El HaMelech Brachot Vehodaot Me'ata V'ad Olam Baruch Ata Adonai El Melech Gadol Batishbachot El HaHodaot Adon HaNiflaot Habocher b'shirei zimra melech el chei ha'olamim. We continue with Chatzi Kaddish, page 338. Yitkada v'yitkadash shemei rabbah ve'almad yirak yirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayedecho beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv yimru amen. Yesh mei rabbah mevarach le'alam alamei alamaya Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitromam v'yinasei V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shmei l'kudesha B'richu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma, v'yimeru, amen. We continue on page 340 with the call to prayer, Baruch Hu, page 340. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Yotzer or uvorei choshech, choseh shalom, uvorei et hakol. You may be seated as we continue with the blessings before Kriyat Shema, page 340. Hakol yoducha, ve'hakol yishabechucha. Ein kerkecha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh, v'ein zulatcha malkeinu l'chayei olam haba. Hefes bildecha goleinu limot hamashiach, v'ein dom elecha moshienu, litchiyat hametim. El Adon al kol hamasim, baruch umvorach befi kol neshama gadlo, Betuva malei olam, tatu tvuna sovevimoto. Hamid goel al chayot hakodesh v'nedar bechavod al merkava, zechut umishor lifnei chiso, chesed derachamim lifnei chvodo. Tovim meyorot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram bedad, hevina uvaskel koach ugvura, natan bahem liyot moshlim bekerev tevel. Veleim ziv umfikim noga, noeh zivam bechol haolam, Semechim betzeitam esasim bevoam hosim be'eim ha'retzon konam pe'er v'chavo nonim lishmo tola verhina lezecher malchuto kara l'shemesh va'yizrach ora v'hitkin surat halvana Shevach nonim lo kol tzeva maharom tiferet ugedula srafim ve'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh Yanai nai nai yanai 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 nai nai yanai 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 nai nai yanai nai Ya na ya na ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na na ya ya na 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 ya na na ya ya na 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 ya 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 na na ya na na ya na na La el asher Shabbat mikol hamasim, bayom hashvi'i alav yashavon. Imbarach Moshiach Shabbat Nedacha ve'al me'orei or shasita yefaru chatzela. Page 344. Titbarach tzureinu malkeinu v'goaleinu borei kedoshim v'achim. Kulam avim, kulam berurim, kulam giborim, v'kulam osim be'ema v'yiraretzon konam, v'kulam potchim epihem b'kedusha v'torah, b'shira u'b'zimra, u'mevarchim, u'meshabechim, u'mefarim, u'maritzim, u'makdishim, u'mamlichim, et shema el hamelech, הגדול הגיבור והנורא, קדוש הוא, וכולם מקבלים עליהם. all מלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונונים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש להיות שם בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ובנימה קדושה. כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים בירה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. והאופנים וחיות הקודש, ברעש גדול מן השיאים לעומת שרפים, לעומת המשבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. ליל ברוך לימות יתנו למלך העולם. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. Page 346. אהבה רבה אהבתנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה ותרח עמלת עלינו, אבינו מלכנו. והערננו בתורתך, ודבק לבנו מצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. אבינו שלום בקרב תנו לשמך גדול סלע באמת, להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. We continue with the second and third paragraphs of the Shema individually, page 348. מהשמיים לארץ ויאמר להם ציצית אל תזכרו לי עד אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת יציב ונחל וחיים ישר ולמען לדור ודור קיים ושמו קיים וחיסון אחון ומלכותו ומנתו לעד קיימת ודבריו חיים וקיימים אבנים ונחמדים לעד עולמי עולמים על אבותינו ועלינו אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצאנו צור ישועתנו פודנו מצלנו מעולם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם middle of page 350 ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם ברוך רם וניצח גדול ונורא תהילו לעליון ברוך הוא ומבורך משה בני ישראל לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נהדר בקודש נורא תהילות אוסף אלה שירה חדשה שמחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו Adonai Himloch Leolam Vaed. We rise for Tzor Yisrael, page 352. Following Tzor Yisrael, we begin the Amidah for Shabbat morning together on page 354. And after the Kedusha on page 356, we continue with the individual whispered Amidah that continues through page 364. Tzor Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, Uvdei chinumecha, Yehuda ve'Yisrael, Go aleinu, Adonai tzvaot shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Abuteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avod, U'mevi Goel Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Ufoked U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechaye Metim Atah Rav Lehoshia, Mashiv haruach umorid hageshem. Mechakel chaim bechesed. Mechayei meitim berachamim rabim. Tomech noflim berofech olim. Umatir atzurim. Umekayem emunato. Lishenei afar. Michamocha bal gevurot. Umido melach. Melech memid umechayeh. Umatzmiach Yeshua. V'ne'eman ata lachayot metim. Baruch atah Adonai. Mechayeh hametim. Mekadesh et shimcha ba'olam. Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom. Kakatuv al yad neviyecha. Ekara zeh el zeh ve'amar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzivot, Meloch ha'aretz kivodo. Hazbekol, Rash Gadol, Adir v'chazak mashmiim kol, Minasim lumat serafim, lumatam, Baruch Yomeru. Baruch, Baruch, Kivor Adonai, Mimkomo, Mimkomecha Malkeinu Tofia, Vetim Loch Aleinu, Ki Mechakim Anachnu Lach, Matai Timloch B'Tzion, V'karov b'yameinu le'olam va'ed tishtakon. Titkada v'titkadash b'toch Yerushalayim yecha l'dor v'ador u'lenetzach u'lenetzach netzachim. V'eineinu tirena malchutecha kadavar hamor meshirei uzecha al yidei David Meshiach tzidkecha. Imloch Adonai le'olam, Eloi Tzion, L'dor v'ador, Hallelujah. L'dor v'ador nagid godlecha, U'lenetzach netzachim kedushacha nakdish, V'shivchacha Eloheinu impinu lo yamush le'olam va'ed, Ki HaMelech Gadol v'kadosh ata, Baruch ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together for Kaddish Shalem, page 392. Yikara v'yikara shemei Rabba ve'alma dibrak yirtei v'yamlich machutei b'chayechot v'mechonu v'chayelcho b'eit Yisrael ba'gala v'zman kariv v'imeru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach le'alam l'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yidadar v'yidala v'yidala shmei dekudesha b'richu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Tidkabal tzloton avaton l'chol Yisrael kodam avahon divishmaya v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom imromav Uyaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. We continue with the Psalm for Shabbat, page 32, the Psalm for Shabbat. Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh, Shebo Hayu Alevim Ormim Beit HaMikdash, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat. Tzadikata amar Yifrach Keyeves Balvanon Yiskeshetulim Eved Adonai Bechatrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Teshenim verananim yiyu lehagid ki yashar Adonai tzuri velo havlatabo. Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 52. Yitgadal, V'yitkadash, Shemei Rabba, Be'alma Divra Kirutei, V'yamlich Machutei, V'chayechon U'vyomechon U'v'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala U'vizman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach, Le'alam Alamei Almaya. Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitdaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei dekudesha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom imromav, Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's live stream and in-person Shabbat morning service. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're joining us for many times, also welcome. And if you're at home watching on live stream, it's a pleasure to have you in our extended community. And if you're here in the sanctuary, it's a pleasure to see your faces in person. Well, some of your faces, the top half of your faces anyway. My name's Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. This is my son, Jonah. And at this point in the service, for the last few months, we've been announcing that we do things a little differently in the time of COVID. And so I'm going to lead the service for taking the Torah out of the ark, but I'm not going to touch the ark or the Torah. The Sheng family, who is reading Torah, will take care of all of the Torah aspects, including taking out the Torah and doing Hagbah And then, of course, they're going to read from the scroll. And people have been honored with an aliyah to the Torah, which usually means to ascend to the bima, will be ascending to just below the bima, in order to make sure that everybody who takes an aliyah has a visual recognition of the words of the parsha. We are beginning the service with a Sephardi custom of beginning with Hagba, and that way everybody will be able to see the words of the Torah and have that visual recognition at the beginning of the service. And then, if you've been honored with an aliyah, you should have that in mind when you say the blessings, that visual recognition. With that, I invite you to turn now to page 394 as we join together for taking the Torah out of the ark. Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai v'yein kemasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshatecha bechol dor v'ador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Av harachamim, heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion. Hivnei chomot Yerushalayim, Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim. Ki becha levad batachnu, Melech el ram v'nisa, Adon olamim. Please rise as the ark is open. Vayehi bin Aharon, vayomer Moshe, Koma Adonai, v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu misanecha, mipanecha, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, u'devar Adonai miYerushalayim, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'alo Yisrael, b'kedushato, b'shemei Mariama. Be'yanarachet, ve'lishmei kadisha, kadisha yakira, amna imar tushbechan, yehe'avakodamak, ve'tiftach libi, ve'oraita, ve'tashlim mishalin delibi, ve'libadechol amach Yisrael, ve'tabul chaim, ve'lishvam. Amen. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Echad Eloheinu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai Shemo Yachtav. Lecha Adonai Hagedula Ve'Hagevura Ve'Hatiferet Ve'Hanetzach Ve'Hahod Hichol Bashamayim U'Ba'aretz Lecha Adonai HaMamlacha Ve'Aminase Lechol Erosh Romemu Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Yishtachavu Lehadam Raglav Kadoshu Romemu Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Yishtachavu Lehar Kodsho Ki Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Remain standing for Hagbah. Zot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Livnei Bnei Yisrael Al Pi Adonai B'Yad Moshe. You may be seated. The Torah reading for Shabbat this morning is the second Torah portion from the book of Shemot, Exodus, Parashat Va'era. And as it is the second triennial, we are not beginning at the beginning of the Parsha, but right in the middle, at chapter 7, verse 8, which can be found on page 357. Last week, the book of Exodus opened up with the story of the conspiracy theories of Pharaoh as he slowly enslaved the Jewish people. The choosing of Moshe, the unlikely leader, who, though he was slow of speech and slow of tongue, and did not wish to lead the people, was chosen by God because of his compassion for those who are his kinspeople, and also his compassion for those who are strangers, and even his compassion for animals. It is compassion that Moshe brings to the job of leader. That compassion is, according to many commentators, why God chose Moshe specifically. And we now find ourselves in the middle of Parashat Va'era as Moshe and Aaron come to Pharaoh to ask Pharaoh's permission to release the Jewish people to worship God in the desert. Page 357, Exodus chapter 7, verse 8. Vayazor v'yagen v'yoshia l'chol hachosim bo v'nomar amen hakol havu gadolinu kavod laTorah tamod. Bracha Chana bat Avram David v'Simcha Liah Rishona Baruch Shenatan Torah l'Amo Yisrael b'Kedushato V'atem adveikim Adonai Elohechem Chaim kulchem hayom.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevarach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bacha banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Haron lemor ki yedaber alechem paro lemor tenu lachem mofet ואמרת אל אהרון, קח את מרדך, והשלך לפני פרעה יהי לתנין. ויבוא משה ואהרון אל פרעה, ויעשו כן כאשר ציווה אדוני. וישלח אהרון את מטהו לפני פרעה ולפני עבדיו, ויהי לתנין. ויקרא גם פרעה לחכמים ולמחשבים, ויעשו גם הן חרטומי מצרים ולתיהם כן. וישליכו איש מטהו ויהיו לתנים, ויבלע מטה אהרון את מטותם, ויחזק לפרעה ולא שמע עליהם כאשר דיבר אדוני.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נוטה בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Talmud. Esther bat Eliyahu v'tzipora aliyah shenit. The second aliyah can be found on page 358, chapter 7, verse 14.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe kavedech Paro me'an l'shalech ha'am lech el Paro b'boker hinei yotzei hamayma v'nitzvata v'krata sefata yahor ha'mater asher nafalech v'lesh tikach b'yadecha v'amarta elav Adonai Elohei ha'ivrim shalachani elahi chlemor Shalach adamihi vayavduni bamidbar hine lo shamata ad ko amar Adonai bazot tedah ki ani Adonai hine anochi mache b'mater asher b'yadi al hamayim asher baya'or v'nihafachu l'adam v'hadaga Asher bayahor tamutu v'hash hayahor v'nil u'mitzrayim v'yishtaho mayim min hayahor.
Amen. Talmud. From Esther bat Shaga Faivel, Aliyah Shlishit. The third Aliyah can be found on page 759, chapter 7, verse 19. Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Va'ed. Amen.
Ready? Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe emor el Haaron kach macha unte yadcha al mimei Mitzrayim al nachorotam v'al rechem v'al gamichem v'al kol mikvei mimichem v'yuda v'chaya b'kol eretz Mitzrayim u'va'etzim u'va'avanim ויעשו כן משה ואהרון כאשר ציווה Okay, כאשר ציווה אדוני, וירא בבית את המים אשר ביור לעיני פרעה לעיני עבדיו, ויחבקו כל המים אשר ביור לדם, והדגה אשר ביור מיתה, ויבש היור, ולא יכלו מצרים לשתות מים מן היור, ויהי הדם בכל ארץ מצרים, ויעשו כן חרטומי מצרים בבתיכם, ויחזק לפרעה ולא שמע עליכם כאשר דיבר אדוני. ויפן פרעה ויבוא אל ביתו ולא שת ליבו וגם לזאת. ויחפרו כל מצרים סביבות היור מים לשתות, כי לא יכלו לשתות ממימי היור, וימלא 7 ימים אחרי חכות אדוני את היור.
Amen. Yamod. Nachman ben Avraham Alchunen, Aliyah Revi'it. The fourth Aliyah can be found on page 360, chapter 7, verse 26. Baruch Hanam Baruch Le'olam. Amen.
Amen. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, בוא אל פרעה, ואמרת אליו, כה אמר אדוני, שלח את עמי ויעבדוני, ועמהם נתן לשלח, והנה אנוכי דוגף את כל גבולך בצפרדים, ושרת היור צפרדים, ועליו באו בביתך ובחדר משכבך ועל מיטתך, ובית עבדיך ובעמך, ובתנורך משרותיך, ובקרבך וכל עבדיך, ויהיו הצפרדים.
Amen. Yamod Mordechai ben Chanoch bebeila Aliyah Chamishit. Before Murray does the blessings, a word about the what we're reading. We've now done the first 2 plagues, blood, dam, and frogs, Tzfardea. You wonder, how many plagues are there? Well, of course, there's an obvious answer. Everybody knows there are 10 plagues. But were there actually 10 plagues? Well, you might be thinking that I'm going to go to 250 plagues like the Haggadah does. That's not where I'm going here. If you read Psalms, there are 2 different Psalms that also talk about the plagues. And both of those Psalms have 7 plagues. And biblical scholars have shown that, in fact, there were several different traditions of the plagues in Egypt, of what they were. Now, the 7 plagues in Psalm 86 are not the same. They overlap with our 10 plagues, but they're not the same. They're not the same ones. And the ones that are in Psalm 119, I forget which psalm, overlap with those, but are not quite the same. And in fact, it seems like dam, blood, is common to all of the different traditions of how many plagues there were. And in fact, our Torah probably uses both the priestly, that's the Kohanic, the P source version of dam, of the blood plague, and the JE source version of the blood plague. That's why some of the verses seem to say that the only part of the water in Egypt that turned to blood is the Yeor, the Nile River, and some say that it was all the water in Egypt, including the springs and if you dug a well, that was also blood. There's 2 conflicting understandings of what happened there, and in reading within the description of the plague itself. And that's probably because it's a conglomeration of multiple different sources of what happened. So if you pull these apart, scholars have suggested that each of the different traditions actually had 7 plagues, because 7 is a much more Jewish number than 10, and that it was only in the editing process, when they were trying to put all of this together, that they decided to go to 10 because it's a nice round number, and that way they were able to take from multiple traditions the plagues. Oh, and they left some out, right? Some of the plagues that are described in the Psalms do not appear in the book of Exodus. So, just something to think about when somebody asks you how many plagues are there. You might say, well, some people say 7, some people say 10, maybe they were 15. The rabbis say there were even up to 250. The 5th aliyah can be found at the top of page 361, chapter 8, verse 1. Baruch Adonai Barach Leolam Vaed. Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Emor el Aaron, Neteat yadcha b'yimatcha al hanaharot, al hayorim v'al hagamim, ha'al et hatzvadim al eretz Mitzrayim, vayet Aaron et yado al mimei Mitzrayim, v'ta'al hatzvadea v'tachas et eretz Mitzrayim, v'yisuchen hartumim balatechem v'yilu et hatzvad et hatzvardim al eretz Mitzrayim, vayikra paro leMoshe uleAaron, vayomer hatiru el Adonai, vayaser hatzvardim mimeni umeami, ve'ashalcha et ha'am yizbechu l'Adonai. Vayomer Moshe leparo, hitar alai, lematai atir, lecha ulevadecha ulamecha, lechakrit hatzvardim mimcha umibetecha, rak biortis arna. Vayomer lemachar, vayomer kidvachar leman teda ki en kadonai Eloheinu.
Amen. All right, someone has to call me up if I'm doing
Oh. Oh, who's good with names?
Oh.
Raphael,
Raphael, Pinchas,
Elazar,
Ben
Aharon,
Aharon,
Beharav,
Miriam, Leah.
The Aliyah Shishit. The 6th Aliyah can be found on page 361, chapter 8, verse 7. Baruch hu et Adonai Amvorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Amvorach Leolam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
This goes to the end of the paragraph. As soon as I find where I start. Okay. Amen. V'saru hatzvardim. Memecha mebetecha umeve'avdecha ume'amecha rak biyortish arna. Vayetze Moshe v'Aaron me'im paro. Vayetzak Moshe el Adonai ad dvar hatzvardim asher sam leparo. Vayas Adonai kidvar Moshe. Vayamutu hatzvardim min habatim min hachatzerot umin hasadot. Vayitzburu otam hamarim. V'tivash haaretz. Vayaparo ki ata harvacha ki chayta harvacha v'hakbet et libo v'lo shama alechem kasher diber Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen.
Yamod. Kalman ben Avraham Aliyah Shavi'it. The seventh Aliyah can be found on page 362, chapter 8, verse 12. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Emor el Aaron, nitei et matcha v'chak et afah haaretz v'haya lekinim b'chol eret Mitzrayim v'yisochen vayet Aharon et yado v'matechu v'yak et afah haaretz v'tchi hakinam v'adam uvahena kol afah haaretz haya kinim b'chol eretz Mitzrayim v'yisuchen hachartomim b'ladechem leotzi et hakinim v'lo yachlu v'chi hakinam b'adam uvavena v'yomru hatrumim el paro etzba Elohim hi v'yehezak leparo v'lo shama alechem kasher diber Adonai.
Amen. We rise for the prayer for healing. Mishe be'irach avoteinu mekor habracha le'imotenu. May the source of strength, whom blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha be'irach avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yakov, Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah, hu yivarech v'yirpeh tacholim. Et Zahava Nechama bat Leah Bracha, vet Michal Ruth bat Tova, vet Malka bat Golda, vet Eric Hurst, vet Michael Roberts, vet Linda Pearlstein, vet Bob Pearlstein, vet Chaim ben Eliezer v'Yocheved, vet Omari Gray, vet Yosef ben Fega Malka, vet Yoreh bat Avram Basara, vet Kyle Scheffler, vet Cecilia Lynn, vet Robert Borschwitz, vet Shmuel ben Yudit, vet Ephraim ben Lotta Rachala, vet Riva Bela bat Avram Chaim Bereza, vet Stuart Green, vet Yitzchak Dov ben Chana, vet Chana bat Odette, vet Yeshua Avram ben Chana, vet Yehuda ben Chayit Rachel, vet Mina bat Aliza, vet Menachem ben Italea, vet Binyamin HaKohen, vet Chernoliba bat Goldachaya, vet Gabriel Mordechai ben Pesi, vet Malka bat Sheva, vet Julia Shans, vet Fegalea bat Minsasura, vet Dinsa bat Liba, vet Sura, vet Chaya Sara bat Rachel, vet Eliezer Avram ben Chaim Yehuda, vet Shai Aviad ben Balfura, vet Dina bat Fegala, vet Yakira bat Dvorachana, vet Leah Simcha bat Dvorachana, vet Chai Bracha bat Dvorachana, vet Mary Alice Hunt, vet Dvorachana bat Dina, vet Eliza bat Dina, vet Bluma bat Gittel, vet Charles ben Evelyn, vet Miriam bat Yami Beit Shmuel, vet Eliyahu ben Rachel, vet Rivka Gittel bat Sarah, vet Shlomo Moshe ben Miriam, vet Yitamasha bat Rachel, vet Miriam bat Sarah, vet Gila Manoah bat Brocha Gittel, vet Shalom ben Chaya, vet Bill Bracken, vet Akiva ben Gittel, vet Miriam bat Malka, vet Eliyahu ben Malka, vet Risha, vet Rachel bat Avram Tzvi, vet Shoshana bat Chana, vet Ranana bat Malka, vet Rivka Liza bat Ranana, vet Zev Reuven ben Chloe, vet Shlomo Yosef ben Avraham, vet Rachel bat Avram Tzvi, vet Sonia Rubin, vet Andrew Parisi, vet Sarah bat Nechemya Vizlatka, V'yet Sharon and Achama, Bad Reuven V'Rezov. Vet Kol HaCholim, Bikilak Shazot. HaKadosh, Baruch Hu, Yimalei Rachmi Malayam, Lachzikam, Raputam. V'yishlach lahem mehira, Rufuat Shem Amin HaShamayim, Rufuat HaNefesh, Rufuat HaGuf, B'toch Shar Cholei Yisrael V'Haolam. V'achezek et yedei oskim b'tzor chayhem, Shabbat Milzok v'harufua krova lavo, Hashta bagalav ezman kariv, v'nomar Amen. Mi shebeirach imotenu, Mekor habracha labotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, a renewal of body, a renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. We remain standing for Chatzi Chadish. Yitkada v'yitkada shemei Rabba, ve'amad yirach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayedecho beit Yisrael, magala, magala, uv'izman kariv imeru, Amen. Yeshmei Rabba mevarach, le'alam la'almei almaya, Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei l'gudesha berichu le'ila min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata tamiran be'alma v'imeru. Amen. You may be seated as we continue with the maftir, which can be found on page 362, chapter 8, verse 12. Yamod Chaim ben Getzel etol likriyat haftara. Baruch Adonai Baruch le'olam va'ed. Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe emor el Aaron nitei et matcha v'chak et afar haaretz v'chaya lekinim b'chol eretz Mitzrayim v'yisuchen v'yet Aaron et yado v'mateho v'yat et afar haaretz v'tchi hakinam b'adam uvavhena kol afar haaretz chaya kinim b'chol eretz Mitzrayim v'yisuchen chartumim b'latechem lehotzi et hakinim v'lo yachlu v'tchi hakinam b'adam uvavhena v'yomru chartumim el paro etzba Elohim hi v'chezach לפרעה ולא שמע עליהם כאשר דיבר אדוני.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. The Haftarah for Parashat Va'era is drawn from the book of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, and contains one of Yechezkel's oracles against the nation of Egypt. Interestingly, right, that means that the Torah portion brings the plagues against Egypt in Moshe's time, and the prophet Yechezkel is bringing harsh judgments down upon Egypt in his own time, which is centuries later. So we get a sense of the Bible's, the sense of continuity, the sense of holding space for both old and new, ancient and modern oracles. The Haftarah can be found in our Chumash on page 370. Page 370, the Haftarah for Parashat Va'ira.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'neviim tovim v'ratzav divreihem ana'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'b'Moshe avdo u'b'Yisrael amo b'neviei ha'emet v'tzedek. כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, בקצבי את בית ישראל מן העמים אשר נפוצו בם, ונקדשתי בם לעיני הגויים, וישבו על אדמתם אשר נתתי לעבדי ליעקב, וישבו עליה לבטח, ובנו בתים ונשאו חרמים, וישבו לבטח, בעשותי שפטים בכל השעתים אותם ומסביבותם, וידעו כי אני אדוני אלוהיהם. בשנה העשירית בעשירי ב-12 לחודש היה דבר אדוני אלי לאמור, בן אדם, שים פניך על פרעה מלך מצרים, והיא נבא עליו ועל מצרים כולם. דבר ואמרת, כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנני עליך פרעה מלך מצרים, התנים הגדול, הרובץ בתוך יוריו, אשר אמר לי יואר, ואני עשיתיני, ונתתי אחים בלחייך, והדבקתי דגת יורך וקשקשותיך, והליתיך מתוך יורך, ואת כל דגת יורך וקשקשותיך דבק, ונטשתיך המדברה אותך ואת כל דגת יורך על פני השדה תיפול, לא תאסף ולא תקבץ, לחיית הארץ ולעוף השמיים נתתיך לאוכלה. וידעו כל יושבי מצרים כי אני אדוני, יען היותתם משענת קנה לבית ישראל, בחופשם בך בכף תירוץ, ובקעת להם כל כתף, ובהישנם עליך תשבר, ועמדת להם כל מותניים. לכן כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנני מביא עלייך חרב, והכרעתי ממך אדם ובהמה, והייתה ארץ מצרים לשממה וחורבה, וידעו כי אני אדוני. יען אמר יאור לי ואני עשיתי, לכן הנני עד לך ואל יורך, ונתתי את ארץ מצרים לחורבות חורף שממה, ממגדול סבנה ביד גבול כוש, לא תעבור בה רגל אדם ורגל בהמה, לא תעבור בה ולא תשב 40 שנה. ונתתי את ארץ מצרים שממה, בתוך ארצות נשמות, ועריה בתוך ערים מחרבות תהיינה שממה 40 שנה, וחפיצי אותי את מצרים בגויים, וזריתים בארצות, כי כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, מקץ 40 שנה אקבץ את מצרים מן העמים אשר נפוצו שמה, ושבתי את שבות מצרים, והשיבותי אותם ארץ פטרוס, על ארץ מכורתם, והיו שם ממלכה שפלה, מן המלכות תהיה שפלה, ולא תתנשא עוד עד הגויים, אם עתתים לבלתי רודות בגויים, ולא יהיה עוד לבית ישראל למבטח מזכיר עוון בפינותם אחריהם, וידעו כי אני אדוני אלוהים. ויהי ב27 שנה בראשון באחד לחודש, היה דבר אדוני אלי לאמור, בן אדם, נבוכדנצר מלך בבל העביר את חילו עבודה גדולה, את צור כל ראש מקרח וכל כתף מרוטה, ושכר לא היה לו ולחילו מצור על העבודה אשר עבד עליה. לכן כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנני נותן לנבוכדנצר מלך בבל את ארץ מצרים, ונשוא המונה, ושלח שללה, ובזז בזה, והייתה שכר לחילו. פעולתו אשר עבד בה, נתתי לו את ארץ מצרים, אשר עשו לי נאום אדוני אלוהים. ביום ההוא אצמיח קרן לבית ישראל, ולא אתן פתחון פה בתוכם, וידעו כי אני אדוני. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך אחורו ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ברחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו.
אמן.
רחם על ציון כי היא בית חיינו, ולעלבות נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו, ברוך אתה אדוני,
ברוך שמו.
שמח ציון בבניך.
אמן.
שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך, ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך, במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסו לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכפה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, Magen David.
Amen.
Al HaTorah v'al HaAvodah v'al HaNaviim v'al Yom HaShabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limenucha lichavod u'letifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modin lach u'mevarachim otach yitbarach shimcha b'ficho chai tamid le'olam voed Baruch ata Adonai
Baruch Shmo.
Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Amen. Yasher Koach to Howie for chanting the Haftarah, and a big Yasher Koach to the Mishpachat Sharfstein Sheng for reading Torah today. In the place of our normal prayer, the blessings we seek, I'm going to read a prayer in honor of Martin Luther King Day, written by Rabbi Lily Kaufman. Actually, I think she's Rabbi Chazan Lily Kaufman, 2 ordinations, who wrote this prayer. Martin Luther King Day is this coming Monday. A prayer in honor of Martin Luther King Day. Dr. King would have faced hard facts today. He would know the number of children going hungry in America this very minute. He would know the number of our war dead and those wounded in new ways. He would know the astounding costs of financial corruption. He would have seen beyond the numbers to the faces of our people, and he would still have faith in them and in what is right. He would be preaching now a determined, measured, poetic, prophetic outrage. He would be teaching by example our civic duty of compassion and decrying the grave civic danger of cynicism. He would challenge the strange new ideas that money equals speech and corporations are people in a democracy. When he gave his life for people's rights of speech and assembly and the vote, it was for people who had no money to pay for speech. They knew speech as an unalienable right, and their wealth of spirit sufficed. Dr. King had faith in a few great things. One was our essential American dream. Not a middle-class American dream, or an upper-class, a working poor, or an impoverished class American dream, but the defining American dream which lifts up those bowed down, the abiding American dream of liberty and justice for all. Dr. King asked of God in 1964, "Grant that we will always reach out for that which is high, realizing that we are made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity. May we learn again to reach out for that which is high." Amen. Has somebody been assigned to lead us in the Musaf service? Yes, Musaf. All right. Yeah, start from down there. Ashrei, page 420 in our Siddur. Again, the Sharfstein Stang family will take care of the on the bima moving of the Torah. And as Murray begins the Musaf service, do you guys want to lead Ashrei? You're welcome to. Nope, that's also fine. Ashrei, page 420.
אשרי אשרי ביתך, אוי דלו חסלה.
You got it.
Berhashim Halelam Vaed.
Bechol yom avarchecha, v'ala shimcha le'olam va'ed.
Gadolonai. Mameod, Beligdul Toin Heker.
Dor l'dor yishabach masecha, uguratecha yagidu.
Hadar Kibot Hodeha. Uvedi Britni Futaha. Asicha.
Bezuz naratecha yomeru, ugdulatcha asafrena.
Zahiraftu Hayabiu. Besika Hayir Anenu.
Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erech apayim ugdal chesed.
Tovanai Lako. Rahamavako Masav.
Yodu Adonai kol masecha, v'chasidecha yivarchucha.
Kevod Mahuta Hayomeru. Ugdulaha. Yiraberu.
Leodia limnei adam gvurotav, uchvod adar malchuto.
Mahuta Hamahu Kolami. Umeftaltacha Behotor Vador.
Samech Adonai lechol anoflim, zokef lechol akufim.
Ene Kolaha Yisaberu. Beatanatin Lahem et Aquam Beito.
Poteach et yadecha, umasbia lechol chai ratzon.
Sadiq Adonai Beholder Abha. Vasip Bechol Masav.
Karov Adonai lechol korav, lechol asher yikra'u be'emet.
Etzonir Aviasev. Yet Shabbatam Mishma Vyoshiem.
Shomer Adonai kol oavav, v'et kol reshaim yashmid.
Tila Adonai Yidaber Pi. Yivarech Kobosar Shem Yishol Le'olam Vaed.
Manachnu nevarech ya, me'ata v'ad olam, Hallelujah. We rise, page 422. Hodo aleret v'shamayim, vayarem keren leyamo, heila lecho hasidam, livnei Yisrael am karovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. We continue individually, page 424. Mizmor David, hallelujah. Page 426.
ובנוחו יומך. תלקח טוב נתתי לכם, תורתי אל תעזובו. עץ חיים היא, ומחזיקים בה, בתומכיה מאושר. דרכיה, דרכי נועם, וכל נתיבותיה שלום. השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה. חדש, חדש ימינו, חדש ימינו כקדם. Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. Rabbi Abraham Yoshua Heschel, who marched with Dr. King, said, "When I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I am old, I admire kind people." Over the course of the 10 plagues, the Torah repeatedly informs us about the condition of Pharaoh's heart, when it is reinforced or strengthened and when it is hardened. The text also narrates how Pharaoh's heart changes and who is responsible for that change. Sometimes Pharaoh is credited with toughening himself. Vayachbed paro et libo, Pharaoh reinforced his heart. But sometimes the text attributes the strengthening and hardening to God. Ki ani hichbadati et libo, for I, God, have reinforced his heart. Indeed, at the very outset, when God first issues Moshe with instructions for confronting Pharaoh, God promises Moshe that God will toughen Pharaoh's resolve and harden his heart. Va'ani akshe et lev Paro, v'lo yishma aleichem Paro. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh will not listen to you. This opens up the possibility that even when the text does not explicitly ascribe the change in Pharaoh's disposition to God's involvement, it can still be traced back to God's will rather than to Pharaoh's own. God's taking responsibility in this way inspires some of our major commentators and maybe some of ourselves, such as Ibn Ezra and the Ramban, to ask, how could God have manipulated Pharaoh in this way? Isn't God depriving Pharaoh of his free will by making him stubborn? And if the reason why Pharaoh doesn't free the Jewish slaves is that God has deprived him of his ability to emancipate Bnei Yisrael, then how is it fair for God to punish Pharaoh for not letting them go? It's a good question. However, God is being quite fair. As Pharaoh himself exclaims, God is the righteous, and my people and I are to blame. The claim that God is being unjust in manipulating Pharaoh and subjecting him and his people to the plagues on illegitimate grounds makes two unnecessary and possibly incorrect assumptions. First, it assumes that the plagues are coming to Pharaoh and his people on account of Pharaoh's refusal to let God's people go at the time that Moshe asks. However, it is equally, if not more reasonable, to assume that the plagues are coming because Pharaoh had enslaved God's people in the first place and caused them to suffer for the decades prior. Pharaoh is not being indicted on this momentary refusal to emancipate his slaves, but rather on a history of abuse and incitement. Furthermore, we see that God orchestrates Pharaoh's ability to hold on to Bnei Yisrael in order to punish Pharaoh. God explicitly says that God wants Pharaoh to refuse to send the people in order to send the plagues. And God instructs Moshe to tell Pharaoh, in chapter 10, verse 1, God said to Moshe, "Come to Pharaoh, for I have reinforced his heart and the heart of his servants in order to extend these signs of mine in his midst." God does not send the plagues on account of Pharaoh's refusal to free the Jewish people. Rather, God ensures that Pharaoh refuses to free the Jews so that God can display God's strength. God does not create a reason to punish Pharaoh. What God helps to create are the conditions necessary to bring the punishment and thereby display God's greatness. God sends the plagues as a consequence of Pharaoh's previous behavior, not as a consequence for how he is acting presently. God's manipulating of Pharaoh's will now is akin to placing Pharaoh's hands in handcuffs so that he can be disciplined. It is not the case that God is moving Pharaoh's hands or heart to commit a crime. God's acts are merely punitive, and justifiably so. God intends to send harsh retribution, which Pharaoh more than deserves, regardless of when or even if Pharaoh releases God's people. The Egyptians are going to absorb at least some fraction of God's vengeance, But what is not guaranteed without intervention is that the plagues will descend upon Egypt while Bnei Israel are still there. God wants Bnei Israel to be in Egypt while the plagues come for two reasons. First, the plagues are not only designed to punish and impress Pharaoh, they are also designed to impress the people of Israel. As God continues, and in order that it be told in the ears of your children and your grandchildren that which I have caused to pass in Egypt and my signs that I have placed in them, and you will know that I am God. If Bnei Israel had already departed for the promised land, and therefore do not see the plagues themselves, then the plagues will have served at most only half of their function. But, perhaps more importantly, if God sent the plagues to Pharaoh after he freed Bnei Israel, then Pharaoh would not know that the plagues came on account of the enslavement of the Jewish people. He would not have known that the Hebrews' God is the one who sent the plagues, and perhaps worst of all, he might think that the plagues are a consequence of not of his having enslaved the people, but on account of his having freed them. The second assumption in the critique of God's having hardened Pharaoh's heart is that the hardening has the effect of making Pharaoh behave in a way that he was not behaving before and would not be otherwise. It asserts that if God had left Pharaoh's heart alone, then Pharaoh would be free to do and therefore would do the right thing. This understanding relies on a definition of the heart as the seat of the will. A hard heart makes you obstinate and unwilling to do what is right, and a soft heart makes you yielding, impressionable, good. However, when the Torah describes the Jewish people as obstinate and sinful, it refers to them not as stiff in their hearts, but rather as stiff in their necks, kshei oref. Biblical literature often treats the heart as the location of the intellect, not of the will. As Nahum Sarna writes in his book on Sefer Shemot, Exploring Exodus, man's thoughts, his intellectual activity, the cognitive, conative, and affective aspects of his personality are all regarded as issuing from the heart. We see the heart as knowing and wise throughout the Torah, perhaps most beautifully when God describes the skill and wisdom involved in crafting the Mishkan and its furnishings, where the Torah refers to the artisans as chachmei lev, wise-hearted. Consequently, when God or Pharaoh hardens or reinforces Pharaoh's heart, what is being strengthened is Pharaoh's ability to reason. God is primarily influencing his intelligence. He makes Pharaoh strong of mind and encourages him to think that he is being clever or that he is being strategic, which masks that he is in fact merely being cruel. God doesn't make Pharaoh tough so much as God makes Pharaoh sharp. Pharaoh's cruelty and propensity to sin is not what God is manipulating. God is strengthening Pharaoh's ability to rationalize his own behavior. Rationalizing a behavior doesn't determine whether or not the action will take place, but rather how it should be evaluated, how one thinks about what has been done. This approach to Pharaoh is pointedly midah keneged midah, measure for measure. A deep understanding of Pharaoh and a close reading of his behavior shows that he does not make decisions based on whether they are right or wrong, but based on whether or not they are wise. Whether or not he is correct, Pharaoh's considerations are entirely strategic. As we see when he launches his campaign against the Jewish people, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pitom and Ramses, for Pharaoh, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became more ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites. Pharaoh doesn't think that killing the Israelite male children is a morally responsible choice to make. He is ostensibly aware of the fact that the children he is slaughtering are innocent. Pharaoh isn't evaluating his behavior in moral terms, in terms of what he is justified in doing. He thinks only in terms of what is the most clever course of action. Let us deal shrewdly with them. Understanding Pharaoh's character and motivation in this way enables us to understand what the process and effect of hardening Pharaoh's heart. It is not that Pharaoh is making a moral calculus and God is taking away his ability to do what is right by making him more stubborn. Pharaoh doesn't engage in moral terms at all. Framing Pharaoh's internal debate as to whether or not to send the people as an intellectual one enables us to notice how much mental labor Pharaoh is doing in order to convince himself to hold on to the people. The first thing that Pharaoh does when he's confronted with Moshe's power is to call his wise men and magicians. When he sees that they can replicate the first few plagues, he decides not to free the Jews. Rashbam explains that when Pharaoh's heart is hardened to say that Aaron also did this miracle through magic, the effect of Pharaoh's hardened heart is that he rationalizes away the plague's significance, claiming that there is no difference between Aaron and his magicians. And it is this unwillingness to recognize the power of God through the plagues that requires God to bring them again and again. It is also clear from a close reading of the text that the hardening of Pharaoh's heart does not have the effect of preventing him from sending the people away. He actually relents and sends them away repeatedly. What his hard heart does is to make him retract his decision. He talks himself out of the choice that he made. The first time we see this is when he asks Moshe to pray for the removal of the frogs and claims that he'll send the people once the frogs are gone. But he does not keep his promise. Rather, Vayar paro ki haita harchava v'hachbed et libo v'lo shama aleihem kasher diber Adonai. Pharaoh saw that there was some reprieve, and he reinforced his heart and did not listen to them, like God said. This pattern repeats throughout the plagues, with Pharaoh reversing his promise to send the people after the frogs, after the wild animals, after the hail, and after the locusts, and of course, running after the people after he frees them after the death of the firstborn. We see that in fact, Pharaoh relents after half of the plagues. He keeps on changing his mind. Yet he retracts his promises to let the people go because he sees that his magicians can imitate the plague or that Moshe can be talked into praying them away. Pharaoh isn't being manipulated. If anything, he is being manipulative. He begs Moshe to take away the plague, but as soon as he gets a reprieve, he denies his own word. If Pharaoh were just stubborn, he would say, "Bring me your worst, and I don't care about the consequences." But he does not stand his ground. He cowers. He gives in. He has the free will to send the people, which he exercises repeatedly. But then he changes his mind. When the Torah demonstrates that Pharaoh isn't freeing his slaves on account of a hardened heart, it does so in order to show us the power of rationalization. The repetition of the same dynamic, plague after plague, shows us that despite how overwhelmingly wrong it is and how damaging it is to his own country, Pharaoh is always able to convince himself anew to re-enslave the people. The re-hardening of the heart is a natural recreation of the conditions of his original sin. Pharaoh chooses to do what he thinks is clever over what he knows is right. Because Pharaoh had initially enslaved the people by doing what he thought was clever over what he knew was right. And perhaps the deeper reason why Pharaoh doesn't free his slaves is not that he still wants them in captivity. It's that he doesn't want to be seen as having made a mistake. He wants his choices to be vindicated. The lesson of the story of Pharaoh's heart is that what's good isn't always what seems smart or strategic, and that what is in fact most clever is not always what is right. Often our minds are not the right place to look for moral guidance because they are too sophisticated, too able to convince us to do what is wrong. Our intellects can make us blind to our own evil through the power of rationalization. This is why the Haggadah opens with telling us that the mitzvah of retelling the story of Exodus, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, is for everyone, even the very wise. Va'afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nivonim, kulanu zikenim, kulanu yodim et haTorah, mitzvah aleinu lesaper b'tziat Mitzrayim. Even if we were all wise, all elders, all sages who know the Torah, it is our obligation to tell the story of leaving Egypt. For perhaps it is not even the very wise, but especially the very wise, who need to learn the essential lesson of the process of the Exodus and the 10 plagues. We need to learn that being wise doesn't necessarily make a person good or kind or moral. And unfortunately, we can become too smart for our own good. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Dr. King, said, "When I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I am old, I admire kind people." I wish you this Shabbat and this week a Shabbat of compassion over cleverness. Shabbat Shalom. We move now to the Musaf service, which can be found in our Sidurim on page 428. Page 428, Chatzi Kaddish. We rise. Following Chatzi Kaddish, we will do a Heicha Kedusha. We'll join with Murray for the beginning of the Amidah on page 430. And after the Kedusha, we will continue with the individual whispered Amidah. We rise. Chatzi Kaddish, page 428.
יתקדש ויתקדש מרבה, ועמד ברכותי ומליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בעגלה, ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. יש מרבה מברך, על המולה מעלמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, יתפאר ויתחומן ויתנשא, ויתהדר, ויתעלה, ויתהלל, שמר קודשה, ברכו, לעלמין כל בחטא ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה, ויאמרו אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל ולאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לאלום אדוני, מחיים את אימת הרב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיים מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמנת לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני וחיי המתים. נרצך ונקדשך כיסוס שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר. קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך הארץ כבודו, כבודו מלא עולם, ושתף שולים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, במקומו הוא יפן ברחמים, ויחון עם היחדים שמו. ערב הבוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה שמע אומרים, שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו, שנתלייני כל חי, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו, שנתלייני כל חי. להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, דברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. למלוך אדוני לעולם, להייך ציון דור ודור, הללויה, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצח עם קדושתך נקדיש, בשובחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together for Kaddish Aleim, page 506.
יתקרא וקרש ברבה.
Amen.
ומה תברכותי ולמחותי וחייכון ומכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קרב ויאמרו
Amen.
אמן.
Yesh me'Rabba mevarach, ve'alam lalmei amaya, yitbarach.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומן ויתנשא ותודה ותודה שמי דקודשה
בריחו.
ללמד כל בכתב ושירתה תוש בכתב נחמתה דמרן דומה ואמרו
Amen.
תקבל צוד הון ועד הון לכל ישראל קודם עבור ושמיה ואמרו
Amen.
יהי שלמה ומשמיה וחיים עלינו על כל ישראל ואמרו
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומה ויעשה שלום עלינו על כל ישראל ואמרו
Amen. Yasher Koach to Murray for leading us in Musaf, and to everybody who participated in our service this morning. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who joined us from the live stream, and everybody who was here in time for us to have a minyan. Thank you to everybody in the room and in our broader community. It's special to celebrate this week the birthdays of Stanley Harris, Noah Brayman, and Abraham Ellenbogen. So happy birthday. And there are no anniversaries in our community this week. So a mazel tov to all of those celebrating in this community. And a special mazel tov to Denise and Nathan Naparstek on the birth of their granddaughter, Anna Giselle Naparstek, to proud parents Eli and Lindsay Naparstek. So, mazel tov. We continue now with Aleinu. Please rise, page 510.
עלינו לשבח
Shabeach ladon
לאדון
hakol, latei kedula, yotzer bereshit, shalom hasanu k'yurei haratzot,
ולא
שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שמחנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו חורים, ומשתחווים ומורים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שבשמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושם יקרו
בשמיים ממעל,
ושכינת זו, בגובה מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, הם אלוקינו וזולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשיבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אין עוד. על כן נקווה לך, אדוני אלוהינו. ותקן עולם במלכות שלך.
כי המלכות שלך ולומד עמו בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Congregation remembers the following individuals who have gone to their eternal rest and whose yahrzeit is this week: Eva Mickelson, Myron Finkelbrand, Ivan Margolin, Michael Naparstek, Martin Hirschenhorn, Charles Shapiro, Bernice Bressler, John Allen, Gerald Kleiman, Martin Myers, Herbert Rosenberg, Matthew Burke, Seymour Gavins, and Abraham Ginsberg. In solemn testimony to the unbroken chain of faith which links one generation of the house of Israel to the next, those who are observing Yartzeit and those who mourn now rise to magnify and sanctify God's name with the words of Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 512. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'alma tifra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. V'agala uv'izman kariv imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam lamei alamaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom mimromah. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Is somebody... Oh, really? Okay. Well, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. It's a pleasure to join with our broader community, even if we cannot be together, all of us together in person. Hopefully, we will soon be able to all be together in person. Some things that are coming up this week that you should know about. Our wonderful Risa has been doing some cooking classes for our high school, and they have been so popular and well received that she is also offering them to the whole congregation on days when the high school doesn't meet. For example, like this Sunday, tomorrow, which because of the long weekend, the high school isn't meeting. So at 10 a.m. This week, join Risa from her kitchen and yours to prepare, I think they're doing knishes. And so please do join with that. This Thursday night will be the final in a series of an introduction to Jewish history with Jeffrey Spitzer, the final class of 6. They're all sort of standalone, though they do progress through history. So feel free to come to the final one, even if you did not attend some of the other ones. One of our members, Jonathan Weil, is beginning a new course starting not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday, the 27th of January, on biblical connections and influences in the work of modern Jewish artists, including modern original works of art from our own congregational artists. Don't forget to come to the adult Tu B'Shvat Seder, which is next Thursday night, and if you are a member of the school community, there is also a school Tu B'Shvat Seder that same day, the Thursday, the 28th of January, just during school time at 4:30 p.m. I'm extremely excited about the weekend of song and celebration with Deborah Sachs-Mintz. Deborah Sachs-Mintz is an incredible musician and artist who is transforming Jewish music through her work at the Rising Song Institute at Hadar. Truly a wonderful, wonderful person, and she's also a rabbinical student at JTS. She's going to be doing Kabbalat Shabbat with us 2 weeks from yesterday, and also a Havdalah and a concert. This is you do not want to miss this kind of concert. Please make sure to register for it. And she's also teaching about Jewish music on Sunday night following her concert, which is the 31st of January at 7:30 p.m. immediately following Mariv. Every single one of those programs will be worthwhile, and I hope the attendance will be high. This is a really big deal that the Adult Ed Committee has put together, a weekend of song and celebration in honor of the Shabbat of Song, Shabbat Shirah, which is that weekend. So please make sure to come to that. There's a bunch more fun stuff coming up, including a new Scholar in Your Residence Judaism and Science series, including an introduction to Prayer Book Hebrew for adults on Sunday mornings, including opportunities to continue our Back to the Basics theme through a study of the spring, through a study of the Jewish calendrical cycle in March. All of these things are wonderful opportunities, so please do come to them and continue, of course, to come to our twice daily Zoom minyan so that people who are saying Kaddish can say Kaddish, so that people who have Yartzeit can say Kaddish at Yartzeit, and also just so that you can have a moment of centering and spiritual moment in your life. I'll just close by saying this is a week that contains both the opportunity to honor Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on Monday with acts of community service and chesed. So please do go out of your way to do some act of chesed in honor of his memory, and also a historic, God willing, peaceful change of power in our government, our federal government, transition of power, which is the hallmark of American democracy, that every 4 or 8 years we have a peaceful transition of power. So I know that I will be praying for that peaceful transition, as will all of us, and I hope that that next week when we join together for Shabbat, we will not have to be acknowledging more violence or death on account of that transition. So it's my deep prayer that we are able to together in a non beyond partisan way support the institutions of American democracy. With that, we'll close our service with Adon Olam, page 514.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Le'ed Nasa B'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Yacharei Kichlot HaKol Vevado Imlov Nora Vehu Haya Vehu Hover Vehu Yeh B'tifara Vehu Yeh B'tifara Vehu Echad V'yein Sheni Lehamshilo Lehabira V'li Reshit V'li Tachlit V'lo Ha'oz V'ha'mizrah V'lo Ha'oz V'ha'mizrah Vehu Eli V'chai Goali V'tzur Chavli V'etzara Vehu Nisi Umanosli Menat Kosi B'yom Merka Menat
Menat kosi biyom ekra.
Yado afkiduchi Betishan Be'aira Be'imruchi Geviati Adonai li velo ira Adonai li velo ira
Shabbat shalom.
Good to have you back, Candy, whole family.
Thank you. Yashikoach.
Look to you.
Ali, you have to stay close to us.